Welcome to Real Smart, the real estate podcast you've been waiting for. I'm Spencer Kallick, a real estate and land use attorney at Allen Matkins. On this show, I sit down with some of the most dynamic and accomplished voices in real estate to explore trends shaping the industry and uncover what truly sets great leaders apart. Today on Real Smart, we're joined by Josh Feffer, owner and principal of Feffer Geological Consulting, a full-service geological and geotechnical engineering services firm for real estate transactions and development across California. Josh has a background in geotechnical engineering, has become a trusted partner to developers, attorneys, investors, navigating complex geotechnical challenges. His insights shape the geotechnical world that we all live in, and he brings us kind of a behind-the-scenes perspective on how to navigate and solve creative geotechnical expertise issues. So, Josh, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Nice introduction.
I appreciate it. I may have even run it by you beforehand, but and frankly, all of it's true. Josh, it's a real pleasure to have you on the show. People are probably wondering, why do I want to hear from a geotechnical engineer? Which you probably ask yourself the same question all the time. But for those people who don't know, what is a geotechnical engineer? What do you actually do? Just kind of play with rocks or dig up dirt, or what does it actually look like in your business on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, it's something that most people don't have to deal with, but everyone who's developing a piece of property somewhere or who's doing some due diligence on a transaction needs to know the stability of the land that they're buying and what it's going to take to develop that property. We're more in the hillside areas where you have more complexity to the underlying ground, steep slopes have an effect on things. We're also in the flatland areas where you potentially have a fault or a liquefiable area. But really, people who are building something need us to provide them a report so that they can take that report, give it to their structural engineer so they know how to design their foundations. They can give our report if they're doing a large excavation, so it goes to their shoring engineer so they can design their shoring. And ultimately, they need the report to go to whatever municipality they're working in so that they get a permit for their work, which they likely can't get without our report as part of their package.
And how do you figure this out? Are you literally digging a hole? And by the way, I know the answer to these questions, but I'm curious, some people don't always know this. Are you literally digging a hole? Is it based off of kind of other reports in the area? Is it just math? What leads to the technical expertise and then the reports that you're putting together?
So the answer is yes. It's all of the above. So we have a multi-pronged approach. We do the historical research. Some municipalities keep documents going back to the 60s, very readily available and searchable. Some are a little bit more difficult to get at, but we know the different municipality, where their stuff's hidden, how we go around getting it. So that's one aspect. What is the historical basis for either that subject site and the surrounding site? We need to understand the subsurface conditions. So if we can attack that and understand it from the historical information that already exists, if it needs to be supplemented with on-site test pits or borings, we bring out our digging crews and dig down, and our geologists love doing that work and going in holes. We drill either small diameter holes that can go down to 100 feet, and we do large.
Do you actually get to go down in that hole?
So we do, some are 8-inch diameter, which we don't, and some of them are these 2-foot diameter holes that they lower somebody down into the hole.
Not you.
I don't do it much anymore,
okay,
but this is my 30th year in the industry, 20th year having my own company. And
you gave it up about 20 years ago.
I'm getting a little creaky to go into crawl spaces and into holes, but at the same time, it's like the most fun thing that we do, and you see some very interesting things, very geeky geology things, but stuff that me and my staff love doing. And so we supplement that subsurface information or lack of knowledge with the knowledge that we get from doing the work, and then we take samples of the soil, we bring it to the laboratory, we test them for certain strength parameters, we do seismic and slope stability analysis if there's a hillside involved, and we put that all into a nice, neat report package that can be digestible for the folks that need to find the information. Again, mainly civil engineers who are doing grading plans, structural engineers that are doing foundation plans, shoring engineers that are doing shoring work for excavations, and then the reviewers at given municipality as well, so that they can say, these guys have done a good job. You know, one thing that's kind of interesting, like City of Los Angeles, to speed the fire rebuilds, we have about 100 different projects ongoing right now, and Palisades rebuild. Also, there's a section of LA County work that's on the part of the coast, and then the rest of it is City of Malibu. We sort of leave the Altadena work to geotechs that are more on the eastern side of the city. But they're allowing us to do reports with just historical information, if there's sufficient information that we can say, hey, we know the subsurface conditions without digging, without doing exploratory borings. We have enough because there are these 5 reports for the subject site and next door, and so we can put reports together with that. So, but typically, if you're doing a brand new development, it's all of the above. We're doing the historical, the on-site, and doing all the associated analysis.
How does someone get into being a geotechnical engineer? Why am I like envisioning you really enjoying playing in the sandbox when you were a little kid, and that led to where you are today? But how did you find this path?
Yeah, it's total serendipity. I am not one of those people that grew up listening, really wanting to become a geologist. I didn't know anything about it. My parents were always great. We went on family trips. We would go to nuclear power plants. We would go to lumber mills. We would go into mines. They loved traveling around and doing stuff like that. I was sort of a disinterested teenager during those years. I actually thought once I was graduating from high school, I grew up here in LA, that I would move to Hawaii and become a bellman and surf. And my parents said—
sounds pretty fun.
My parents said, like hell you are. You're going to live at home and go to school. But I was sort of an indifferent student. I got into Cal State Northridge. I spent 2 years kind of bumming around, not sure what I wanted to do. They said, we're going to kick you out if you don't decide on a major. And I'd happened to take an oceanography class that I thought was really interesting. I was surfing and scuba diving a lot, and I said, what kind of degree can I get? It turned out it was in the geology department. I loved being outside and camping, and I thought I would go to law school. I had no idea what I wanted to do, but my brother was going to law school, and I figured, oh yeah, I can not be a run-of-the-mill poli-sci major and still get in. And then one thing led to another. I got my geology degree. I fell into a full scholarship going to USC for a master's degree. And while I was there, I had a good friend of mine who worked. There really was like, if you do this as a career, you can go into environmental work or you go into geotechnical work. One's the chemical composition of the soil, contaminants and the like, and the other one's the strength of it for designing foundations. And I ended up going that route. I started working, again, serendipity. There was a 3x5-inch index card at UCLA job board, and I got a job.
This is old school. It's like on like etched into the stone, or what?
It was pens and paper, and I remember I got the job there, and they wanted to pay me $15 an hour, and I negotiated to $16, and
Wow.
I thought I was like the best negotiator.
Get you a pack of gum,
yeah. And one thing led to another. We did really interesting work there. That first 10 years of my career was working for a firm that only did legal support. So we were expert witnesses for attorneys and insurance companies. We worked on the largest landslide cases in Southern California. We did flooding cases and debris flows and construction defect litigation. If you remember in the mid 2000s, there had been just a huge amount of development in Orange County that took place very quickly in the 1990s, and their 10-year tail for their getting
liability.
Yeah,
on builders. Yeah,
and so there was so much litigation that went on for years and years, and there was a lot of landslides. And we worked on. There was one that was on Crown Valley Parkway where we actually figured out that the land was moving, and we had instrumentation in the ground, and then got the homeowners out of their homes. And then within like a couple of weeks during major rains, those homes collapsed down into the street. And there was a homeowner association of townhomes below that got steamrolled by this huge mass of soil that came out. So we actually did save people's lives at that point. So it was really interesting stuff. And then the expert witness work that we do it's a smaller part of the business that we run, but we still do a fair amount of that. And so just one thing morphed into another. There really was no plan to do this. I didn't have a love for it as a child, but it's very interesting and I like it a lot. And it gets me out of bed every day.
You happen to be pretty good at it too, let's be honest. So you've seen a lot over the years, a lot has changed. Talk about how the literal landscape of Los Angeles has changed from a geotechnical perspective. Obviously a lot of big homes have gone up. You've been a part of many of those, but has it gotten harder? Has it gotten easier? Do we know more now? So it's more streamlined. What have you seen as the changing landscape from a geotechnical perspective?
It all depends on where you are. So every municipality, one of the strengths that we bring into the field is that we know what Beverly Hills wants versus City of LA, County of LA, West Hollywood, Malibu.
I'm not going to ask you to pick your favorite, although I think I might know what the answer is.
You've been on a few of them where the difficulty factor in some is more than others. We have building codes. The uniform building codes come out and get updated every 3 years. The California, the CBC gets adopted from the UBC. The LABC, the Los Angeles codes get adopted from the CBC. It's all remained fairly constant since about 1963. 1963 was when the city of Los Angeles implemented the first grading codes in essentially the industry. Before that, no one cared about it. It was the Wild West. I explain it like this. Post-World War II, most people lived in the flats. The only people that really lived in the hillsides were in Hollywood because of the studios that were there. But you have the greatest view out of your window right here. But none of those homes existed until the baby boom occurred after World War II. Population filled up all the flat areas and they started moving into the hillsides. And by the mid-1950s, they realized we better get a handle on this because there was huge amounts of soil being moved. No one was minding the store. And so they started implementing some geotechnical requirements. And then in 1963, in April, the city of Los Angeles implemented the first one. So ever since then, they've been the 800-pound gorilla that sort of dictates what other municipalities should do. And then the other municipalities adopt those things over time as the city of LA sort of leads the forefront of that. Over time, things change. And for instance, I'll give you a great example. Right down the street here, there's the 10,000 Santa Monica site, which was
Crescent Heights apartment building, yes.
Yep. Very nice apartment building, and they'll hold on to it forever. They don't need to sell these things as condos. It's a great business model that they have. And we originally did, remember that site was outbid by SunCal against Trump when they sold the old, Jimmy's restaurant that was there. And we did a soil report back then that got approved by the city of Los Angeles. This was probably 2008. City of LA approved it. And then once the bankruptcy went through, the world ended in 2008, it was picked up for, 30 cents on the dollar a few years later, and then Crescent Heights took over. And in the intervening time, they had started requiring earthquake fault investigations in the city of LA that they didn't before. They didn't before because the state of California hadn't issued the appropriate maps, but it was not something that people really cared about and followed. Again, we wrote a report, it got approved for the development of the site. And then all of a sudden,
things changed.
They said that the fault goes right through your property. And I remember being on the phone with the CEO of the company. And I had gone to a talk that Lucy Jones of Caltech had
Absolutely.
said.
Infamous.
And it was the big MTA study regarding the subway and if it was going to go under Beverly Hills High School or not. And where the pathway of the tunneling was going to go. And they decided that there was a fault under my client's property. And he said, what does that mean for me? And I said, well, if it's
not
there,
great.
it means you're going to be putting a park there because you can't put any habitable structures over this thing. And he's, my God, I just spent $50 million on this thing. So we ended up doing the fault analysis. We had a huge 300-foot long trench that went down 20 feet. We had state and city geologists all over it. We had a bunch of sub-consultants that we hired. We didn't find a fault. They built the building. It's a beautiful building. But it's those sorts of things that change, and they change suddenly. But that's other than faulting, that's sort of an unusual sort of thing. Our biggest problem in the industry now is that every few years the building code gets upgraded, and the theoretical seismic value that we have to analyze for keeps going up and up and up. It's 2 to 3 times higher than it was just even 20 years ago. And that, when you run it through the program, starts causing a lot of problems. So before, when you could develop a property, you might need some piles, and maybe those piles were 2 foot diameter and went down 40 feet, and you were stabilizing a pad along a hillside environment. Today, those piles might be 4 feet diameter. You might need a lot more of them, and they're going down 80 feet.
Wow.
And it's solely driven by this seismic factor that we need to plug into the slope stability analysis.
People wonder why it's more expensive to build in California than anywhere else.
And luckily, I hear that the new code that's going to be updated, they've realized they've gone a little crazy with these new numbers, and they're bringing them down a little bit. But suffice to say that we haven't had the earthquake to dictate the need for raising.
But the big one's coming, I've heard. God forbid.
One day it will. It's not the best, most predictable science for earthquakes. Predictive science is pretty poor in general. I mean, we can't even pick who's going to win the football game coming up. But
it's the Rams, obviously. So you get phone calls all the time. You get phone calls, hey, I'm looking at buying this property. What can I do here? Or you get phone calls when the proverbial hits the fan. What phone calls do you like the most, and how do you approach those phone calls? Because usually when someone's calling you, it may not be for the best possible reason, or they're probably in some trouble.
The trouble only really comes if they've had another geotech that screwed them. It comes to us. And I only say that
because they didn't call you first, is what you mean.
Or they just didn't call the right. There's plenty of great firms out there. There's also, I like to say, we run the gamut in our industry. If we were doctors, the bottom 30% would be killing patients right and left.
Oh, Jesus.
100,000 people die in the U.S. or have some medical problem from, in the U.S. just from an accident that occurs. So doctors are doing the same thing. So it happens. But for the most part, look, our main thing that I think is our strong point is that we are communicative with our clients. And if there's a problem with the site, we try to tell them early.
You're, I would say, from, I think, a good perspective, very blunt, very direct. Maybe some people don't want to hear it, but you don't sugarcoat things. You tell people, hey, you got a problem. These are the reasons and how we're going to fix it.
Right, and we tell them how they're going to fix it, and they need to wrap their head around that.
Because usually that's not a cheap fix. That's not an easy fix. It's not your fault, but it's just the reality.
If you want to develop large pieces of property in complex geological environments with lots of regulation, you should hopefully have a couple of bucks in your pocket to deal with these contingencies.
Like, do you ever go up to a property and you're like, this literally can't, no, there's literally nothing you can do, just like walk away? Or is there always a solution? I mean, I guess, money can solve all problems, I suppose, but are there just locations, areas of the city, types of properties that aren't buildable, that are not solvable?
The answer to that, for the most part, is no. I'd say we can send a man to the moon. We may not get
Josh can solve it. Yeah, it's all good.
We may not get them back, but we can get them to the moon. We can build a property. And clients often ask me, hey, can I build here? And I say to them, you're not really asking me that question. What you're asking me is, how much money is it going to cost me to develop here? And am I going to be able to get that money out when I sell the property?
Amen.
So you don't want to hear from me that it's going to cost you $15 million to stabilize a property that you can only sell for $8 million.
That would not be a good
That is, to me, that's still buildable.
Yes.
But to you, it's unbuildable.
Correct.
So we try to counsel them in that way. Like, we can develop this property. You can develop this property. Here's what you're going to need to do it. And if you're underwater, then it's not really developable from that standpoint.
What are some geological risks that people oftentimes overlook, but that are kind of key to getting projects done, and that you see kind of in hindsight, gosh, you really should have looked into that further?
Most people are fairly sophisticated when they're developing a piece of property. And again, if they're doing it properly, they're either hiring a firm on the due diligence pre-purchase part of it, so they understand where the bodies are buried, and how they're going to deal. They may not know how they're going to deal with them, and they may not know exact magnitude of the issue, but they know that there's an issue exists or not. It's very rare to go to a piece of property and say, I don't think that there's going to be any issue, and then all of a sudden you find something. I'm dealing with some properties right now that were rebuilt along the rim of Potrero Canyon in Pacific Palisades. There were landslides that affected properties in the 60s and 70s, destroyed homes. They've spent 20 years if you've driven on PCH or if you've lived along the edge there, you've seen they took decades to grade out this. They raised the ground of Potrero Canyon by over 100 feet. They put in a lot of fill. The homes that are developed along the edge.
Beautiful views.
Beautiful views, beautiful piece of property, but they're sitting on 80-foot deep piles before they get through the fill and into bedrock. And along with depth of this material and the more unknown that there is, we don't really have great science on how long it's going to take 100-foot thick fill to settle. So what these people are finding is that their house, which is on piles, may actually be okay, but the rear yard, which is not on piles, or their retaining walls, those things are cracking. And with unknowns comes complexity, and those complexity lead to these problems. So even though you might say, look, the fill was certified, it's 80 feet deep. In Bel Air, there's some really large landslides that have been fixed over time, but the fix is not without its attendant issues that when you're going to now, you fix this property, these properties trade for tens of millions of dollars. The cost to develop them is over $50 million of, piles, and then the building of the home. There's still some problems that may happen just because we're dealing with this super thick fill condition, or that it's unclear if you have tiebacks and they're sitting next to a home, if those tiebacks move a couple of inches and it causes a crack in your beautiful marble, people get upset. To us, it's a relatively minor amount of movement. It doesn't mean that there's anything catastrophic happening, but you could see that there's a litigation arises out of those sort of things.
Understood. We are in a very seismically active area in Los Angeles in particular. Do people need to be worried about this? Do people need to be thinking about this? Are we over designing things? Are we under designing things? How do you think about the kind of what I'll call next big one coming risk in the LA area? And what are you advising clients about earthquake risk these days?
You should have insurance, not necessarily for single family homes, because the insurance has morphed since the Northridge earthquake. They used to cover everything, every minor crack in your flatwork or retaining wall or walkway you could get all of it repaired, all of it replaced on the insurance company's dime, and all of that's been cut out. You don't need insurance for single family home. Most 2-story, 3-story structures behave pretty well in an earthquake. It's the 4-story, 6-story apartment buildings. Again, we're looking at this beautiful view. Who knows what's going to happen to these 30-story buildings that were built in the 70s and 80s under a different seismic criteria when and if the big one ever comes.
I think this building we're sitting in right now was built like in the 70s, so thanks for giving me some reassurance here. But
I mean, yeah, run for the hills when the big one happens. It's just they build a lot of redundancy into these structures. Look, there was a huge earthquake that just happened in what we all consider to be a third world country. I forget exactly where it was. You saw videos of it happening. I think it was Indonesia, where the waters were sloshing out of the pools at the top of these high-rise buildings. They all performed okay. There was one building that actually collapsed, and that building only collapsed because it was mid-construction and they hadn't gotten all the shear components into the construction of the building to hold it all together. It's the Caltechs of the world that say, oh, we have all of these unreinforced masonry buildings, or we have these steel structures that don't have proper welding or something like that need to be addressed and could have issues. But it's really hard to predict these things. When a large building now is developed, again, like example, the one that we talked about, right down the street, we do all of these time-sensitive, you find the 11 closest faults, you figure out the direction and the magnitude of shaking that's going to occur on that building. We have to do 11 different time histories of how these things are going to occur. The structural engineer puts it into a finite element analysis and figures out the orientation of the building and where all the loading is going to become more acute in the building, and they design it accordingly. I mean, I think for the most part, LA will behave well, and I tend not to be a worrier, and I don't think that we can worry about things that we just have no control over. So I tell people, if you want to live in Southern California and have the most beautiful weather, 355 out of 365 days, then there's a little bit of uncertainty you got to deal with.
Words of wisdom from Josh. I appreciate it. You mentioned when we started talking about the Palisades and the fire, I'm curious to what extent fires create different geological conditions, and what does that mean for the rebuilding of these areas?
I gave a talk once. It was called Winter, Summer, Fire, and Flood were the four seasons that we have. So there is this well-known phenomena that occurs in Southern California because of the type of vegetation that we have on the hillsides, where when they burn and they release oil, and that oil soaks into the ground, and about 6, 7, 10 inches below the ground surface, it creates this waxy hydrophobic layer that if you dig down through the soil and you pour water on it, the water sheets off it like you're pouring it on wax. And so we have this phenomena where, because this waxy layer exists, and it takes several years for new vegetation to establish, for the roots to grow through that and break it up so that when water falls on the ground surface, it can actually infiltrate and soak up into the ground like it did before. So there's a few year time frame post-fire, pre-vegetation going in there, where we have an increased risk of mud flow or debris flows when there's big rainstorms. And that happened right after the fires. If we are supposed to be in El Nino this year, if we don't get a lot of rain, then probably by next year we will be okay. So that's really the only big issue that homes have from a fire standpoint, that the denuded slopes, the removal of vegetation, has left them prone to mud flows. It's okay if you're at the top of a slope because the mud's going to go down to somebody else. If you're at the bottom of the slope,
not so good.
That's when you have the potential issue. But we're going to be out of that pretty soon. From a building standpoint, otherwise, it didn't really change much. I know I am completely minimizing the field of environmental concern and chemical constituents that are in the soil that I have no knowledge of and can't even begin to give my 2 cents about. But from the strength of the soil, nothing really changed. It burned, the thing that drives me crazy, my wife says it's earthquake weather, and I say, honey, you can't say that. Like faults are miles deep and doesn't understand whether it's snowing outside or if it's hot. Once you get down a couple of feet into the ground, the fire burned the surface, but it didn't affect anything 2, 3, 4, 5 feet down. And that's where we're getting our support for these foundations. So it didn't change anything from that standpoint.
Got it. You're also leading a geotechnical engineering firm. You're a leader in your own community, in your own right. What is your leadership style? How do you approach running a business and leading in the community?
One is I always try to be as transparent as possible. I don't have any hidden agendas ever. I'm not a political person, so I don't I'm not approaching something as how am I going to get one over on somebody else. I try to lead people by doing good. I try to lead them with logic and intelligence and thoughtfulness. I think all my employees, I have 15 employees now, they really like the company that they're in, and I empower them to make their own decisions. And when they come to me with a question, I say, how would you handle this? And I always say, look, I can tell you how I would handle this, but there's many different ways to skin the cat. And how would you do it? And that's perfectly acceptable to me. I don't want to dictate to you. I mean, everyone's wired differently, and they have a different intelligent and emotional quotients that they're dealing with, and so they should do what's best for them. So that's how I try to do that when I'm on a nonprofit board or running a committee at some level at some organization. I try to do the exact same things. I try to let each person have their say. I don't try to dictate things. I try to be more like I'm more of the coach than I am the quarterback as far as that's concerned. So I think that's worked well for me, and I think it creates a lot of kumbaya, and people like to be heard, and I think that's important for productivity.
You're a busy guy, you got a lot going on, but I know you also make a lot of time for being a mentor, both in the geotechnical space, but just in the community. What made you want to be a mentor, and kind of what's your approach to mentoring your mentees?
The answer is somewhat the same. I like making money. I like being successful in business. I like also giving back. I think our measure of our time on the short time that we're all here is, it's helping as many people as you can. And again, there's people who do way more than I do. So that is.
You're a good. No, come on, you're a good guy. You're a bench.
But I think that we all have. When you get to a certain point, if you're wired like that, then I want to do good, and it's more than just being a husband and a father and a family member to my extended family and to my business. And I have the capacity and time. I think I'm good at it, and I like doing it. So, every mentee has a different need. They may need professional help at some point. They may need family help of how to deal with, when you're young and have young kids at home, it's a different dynamic than when you're at my age now and you have, 20-year-olds that don't need that daily care. It's a different dynamic. And so I was there, and I had all the difficulties that they had as well. So maybe that's what they need. And some of it is just life lessons to have. And it's I like to do that, and I like to be able to guide people and help them in any way that I can. So, and that again, it helps with mentees and employees and family members and everything that we do.
What about in the geotechnical space, right? Like, what would make someone want to go be a geotechnical engineer today? How are you mentoring kind of the next generation of Joshes in this world? If you could go back, would you have told your younger self to go be a surf bum in Hawaii, or would you have said, this geotechnical engineering stuff, not so bad?
I don't cry over spilt milk, so if I had to do it all over again, I probably would have gone into finance and hopefully made a few $100 million. And by the time I was 35,
there's still time. There's still time.
That ship has sailed. But I like what I do. I'm a real sucker for a resume and a nice phone call from a young person that's graduated recently. I had one of those calls yesterday, and I said, we don't have anything for you right now, but come by the office in a couple of weeks. The least I could do is show you around, explain to you what we do, and take you out to lunch. And, if you need me to introduce you to people, I gladly will. So we have, as far as that's concerned, we have an intern every summer. We try to hire, young, best and brightest to come in. That's how we sort of approach that. The life approach is the same as the business approach. I mean, we like to do good by helping as many people as we can. And again, I think that we've been able to do that over the years, and we have a good connection at Cal State Northridge. I go and talk to the geology club every couple of years and tell them what they're in for in the industry, and it's fun.
So what are you doing when you're not being a geotechnical engineer? Why do I imagine you going to far off places and, going on archaeological digs, or, I don't know, playing with your pet rocks? I don't know what you do, but I'm curious what keeps you busy when you're not doing your business.
Yeah. First of all, I golf.
We've been out there. You're a very good golfer.
I play once a week and sometimes a little bit more during the summer months when we have a little more sunlight. I took a boot camp class this morning at the club. That was great. I'm playing tennis on Friday.
You stay active.
I'm going to Costa Rica with the larger family over Christmas and New Year's. And then the wife and I are going with another couple friends at the end of January. We're going to Australia. We're going to go to the Australian Open.
Amazing.
A buddy of mine just moved to Mallorca. Post-fire, he rented his house out for too much money and moved his 2 young kids and wife to there live for a year. So I'm going to go visit him for a couple of weeks. I think you've talked about, we do this biannual Ryder Cup where we meet these guys from Denmark and play. We're going to be in Sweden, I think, is the next one this September. There's plenty of travel, plenty of fun activities, working out occasionally, and watching the Dodger game again tonight, which I've done for the last 2 nights. And
Go
it's
Dodgers.
Great.
Go Dodgers. Well, look, Josh, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate you taking the time. You've been a great friend and a great colleague as well over many years. We like to have fun, and I've always appreciated your really direct, honest approach, kind of no nonsense. Here's what it is. Let's figure it out. So thank you for what you do, and thanks for joining the podcast.
Appreciate it. Thanks,
Absolutely.
Spencer.
Thanks. The content of this podcast is for the general informational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. Listening to this podcast does not create an attorney-client relationship between you, the host, guest, or Alan Matkins. You should not act or rely on any information discussed without first consulting a qualified attorney regarding your specific situation. Any opinions expressed are those of the individual speaking and do not necessarily reflect the views of Alan Matkins or its clients.